our speaker, Dan Malone, his topic is also timely, considering what's going on in Los Angeles today. Malone has won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism for a series of articles he and a colleague wrote detailing extensive civil rights violations by Texas police officers. The 37-year-old's background includes working for the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and since 1985 he's been with the Morning News, where he is the Fort Worth bureau chief. So please help me in welcoming Dan Malone.
Thank you, Angela, Mrs. King, colleagues, and faculty. The name of Rodney King is now a household word across the country. The verdict of the jury that acquitted the officers who beat him is known across the nation. And so are the consequences of the worst rioting in the United States in 75 years. What happened to Rodney King happens in one way or another to men and women across the nation every day. It just doesn't happen often on videotape. And in Texas, it happens with disturbing frequency. Myself and my partner, Lorraine Adams, spent 2.5 years investigating 637 separate investigations by the U.S. Justice Department into allegations of police misconduct in Texas during 1987 and 88. That's the same agency, the Justice Department, that is now reviewing the aftermath of the California court verdict. What we found was that police in Texas are the most investigated and most convicted group of officers in the nation. It's a record no one is proud of. I'd like to share just one of those cases we reported with you. It's by no means the worst. It may just be typical. A man by the name of Leonard Martin was a Houston airplane mechanic. And Leonard is a big man. He is 2 or 3 inches taller than I am and several pounds heavier. He was driving home in Houston one day when he was pulled over by police for spinning his tires on a rain-slick street. He became involved in a disagreement with the patrol officers who stopped him, and a sergeant was summoned to the scene to calm things down. The sergeant asked Mr. Martin, who was by now handcuffed, to stand outside the patrol car. And as Mr. Martin stood up, the sergeant took out a taser, handheld stun gun, knocked Mr. Martin into a rain-drenched gutter with a powerful, incapacitating electrical jolt. Leonard was now lying in a wet gutter, and the sergeant is standing above him holding the taser and pulling the trigger. As Mr. Martin flipped and writhed with each new electrical shock, the sergeant turned to a colleague and said, "This is better than sex." We checked on the officer, and this wasn't the first time he'd been accused of abuse by a citizen. Records we obtained under the Texas Open Records Act showed he'd been the subject of more than a dozen investigations during his 14 years as a police officer. The sergeant was fired by the Houston police chief, but appealed his decision through civil service and won his job back. The U.S. Justice Department, the Justice Department is investigating Rodney King's beating, investigated that case but took no action. The officer, the last time I checked, continued to wear a badge and carry a gun in Houston, and Leonard Martin fled the state in fear of his life. Things like this happen all the time. Sometimes it's a stun gun, sometimes it's a baton, sometimes a knee or a fist, sometimes it's a gun. Reporting this and the other stories that were awarded the Pulitzer Prize was an ordeal. Our editor, Howard Swindle, compared it to crawling through broken glass. In our case, it was a little bit different. Instead of glass, if you'll pardon my coarseness, we literally crawled through sheep shit one day working on a story. We were looking for a murder weapon that we never found beneath a rundown house in East Texas. We crawled through all of the trash the Dallas Morning News generates, and believe me, that's a lot of trash, looking for a stack of manila folders that had months of work by Lorraine, which just disappeared off of our desks during the pandemonium in the newsroom around the Persian Gulf crisis. We never found those files, and those stories were never reported. We had a sheriff's captain in an interview take his pistol out and wave it around the room as if to perhaps intimidate us. I don't know what his motive was. We were chased from a mobile home by a screaming amphetamine cook. Our movements were monitored by police over their radios, signaling our whereabouts as we went through one county. Those were the adrenaline-producing, exciting parts of the story, of the work. And they make good stories, but let me tell you, they were the exception. Much of the work was monotonous and mundane. We started with a list of these 637 separate investigations that Lorraine obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. All the list had was a Department of Justice case number, which was meaningless to anybody outside the department, the name of the agency that was investigated, and the dates that the investigation began and stopped. To gather information on those, we filed, I didn't count exactly, but in excess of 400 open records requests with each of the police departments or sheriff's agencies that had been investigated, and asked for the records that would document why the person who was complaining was in custody to begin with and what happened to them while they were in custody. About a third or maybe a half of these agencies responded fairly promptly, or within a period of several months in some cases, and gave us the records we were looking for. About another third threw up every obstacle they could think of to keep us from getting the records. And we were fortunate to work with a lawyer named Paul Watler, who used to be a reporter himself and was very aggressive in trying to help us get the information to report the stories and get the stories in the paper. Paul took the equivalent of a 2x4 to the brows of the mulish bureaucrats who would not release the records and persuaded them that we were serious, that they were public, and that we should have them. He was successful ultimately in about another third of the cases. Eventually, I guess we got approximately 90% of the records we requested. Still, now more than 3 years after we began, or almost 3 years after we began, we're still waiting on some of those records. I have no idea what's in them. The reluctance to release these records in Texas is great. I'm reminded of what one county attorney in southeast Texas told us. When we asked for the records and explained what we wanted, he said, "Go bite a wild pig in the ass." That was his response. When we had the records, it was volumes of them. The photocopy bill alone was $10,000 for this paper. It was file cabinet upon file cabinet of document. We started reading them all and sorting through them and figuring out which of these 637 cases might be worth writing about. And we had a list, and we set out to travel around the state, find the victims when they were alive, find their family members when they were not, talk to witnesses, talk to the police officers when they would, and develop the best possible stories that we could. Out of those 637 cases, we wrote approximately about 20 stories. You can You can see from that a lot of the cases just did not, the complainant probably had no reason to complain. And the vast majority of police officers in Texas, I should say, do a good job under horrible circumstances. But there are some appalling cases that stand out where that is not the truth. I don't know how many miles we traveled. My 2-year-old car has 80,000 miles on it. Probably from one end of the state, from both ends and top to bottom of the state, just probably half of the counties we were in. Some of the stories, like the one involving the search for the murder weapon that we never found, did not pan out. And some of the stories, like the officer who compared using the stun gun to sex, did. Since the stories have run, grand juries have indicted 3 police officers, 2 bail bondsmen, and a prosecutor that we reported on. I'm not going to take credit for all of that, or even most of it, but I will say it's nice to see your work vindicated in that fashion and make a difference in even a small way. 15 years ago, more or less, I was where many of you are today. I was attending a junior college in Dallas, Mountain View, trying to figure out where I wanted to go to school and get my degree and if I wanted to be a journalist. I went to UT, worked on the student newspaper there, got a degree, and bounced around from Austin to Corpus Christi to Fort Worth and Dallas. Some of you will probably choose a career other than journalism, and that's fine. Those of you who make the same decision that I did 15 or so years ago, I want to encourage you to do 3 things. Think big, look hard, and persevere. Good things will come to you. Thank you. If anybody has, I brought copies of the articles that I think are out front if anyone would like them, and if there are questions, I'd be more than glad to answer them. You'll have to make a commotion. I can hardly see except on the front row. Three years ago, I was 35, and I'd been a reporter for about 11 years, I guess, and I was a little burned out. I'd been doing basically the same thing for 10 years, working in Fort Worth for the Star-Telegram or the Dallas Morning News, making the same rounds to the same courthouse and looking at the same people day in and day out. Then I looked in our newsroom, and I said, if I stay in this business for another 10 years, who would I want as a role model? Who would I look up to? In or out the newsroom, and I had 2 names on my list. One was Howard Swindle, the projects editor. He's about 45, and the other was Mike Cochran, who is the kind of roaming West Texas bureau chief for the Associated Press. And I just decided I would go talk to both of them and ask them what they did when they were feeling kind of in the valley of their career. And I never made it to Cochran. I just got to Swindle. We had a talk, and he said, I may have something for you, just hold tight for a week. And then a week later, he called me back to lunch and said, Lorraine Adams is under this story. She's found 637 things in the state of Texas we want to look at. Would you be interested? And he outlined the story. I felt, really excited about the prospects of it. It was going to be exciting, a lot of travel, kind of a dream assignment. And he said, I think it'll take the 2 of y'all working full-time 6 months. It took 2.5 years, but it was the most rewarding 2.5 years I've had in my professional career. So that's how I got involved with it. Yeah.
Police brutality is worse in Texas than anywhere else. Do you have any insight as to why that is so? Is it poor training or what?
It's hard to say. We ask that question of ourselves and of experts, and I can't put my finger on why. there are more investigations here. Maybe it is something to do with the well, one person told, this is perhaps as good of an explanation as any. One person I was speaking with about this said that it had something to do inherently with the nature of Texans, that they're proud, independent people and they don't take much guff, and if something bad happens to them, they've got the gumption to go complain about it. That might be it. It might be the type of people that are drawn to law enforcement in Texas. I don't know. Certainly, I think there's ample room for improvement in the way they regulate police in Texas. Yes? That was one of the things that was a bit surprising. The victims that we reported and wrote about crossed every racial and economic line. There were affluent white kids from North Dallas. There were impoverished African Americans from South Texas. There were men. There were women. It was not always a white cop on a minority, if that's what you were meaning.
You mentioned it cost $10,000 for photocopy stone. What was the total cost of this whole project?
I don't know, but that's a good question. The way we were able to get access to these records and write these stories because the paper had the paper had the resources to do it. The lawyer fees, I think, were $74,000. The photocopies were $10,000. Can you imagine? The Open Records Act makes no distinction between a reporter and an auto mechanic or a preacher in terms of their ability to get records. It says the records are the public's. But the fact of the matter is, the public, it takes large institutions with a lot of resources to get access to these because there's a lot of reluctance to giving them up. I don't know what the total cost. I don't know how much money was spent, but it was, we were fortunate to work at a paper that could afford to do that. If it had just been Dan Malone trying to figure it out by himself, it wouldn't have gone very far. I can guarantee you. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
A string of questions, but I'll try and make them simple. One is, I wondered how you verified details such as the man saying this is better than sex. How do you find really valid verification unless the other officer, I suppose the guy on the ground is really not in a position to recall clearly after exact.
In fact, he did not remember, he did not even hear the words. It was another officer at the scene. This was a crowd of cops. Another officer at the scene made the comment, and it was reduced in when I told you this guy was fired. There was an enormous trail of paper before and after he was fired, generated internally by the department, and they interviewed the other officers at the scene because Leonard had complained about what happened to him, and the statement was in those records which we obtained under the Open Records Act.
With that, the trouble that you had with the Open Records Act, did you get a feel that, in fact, there is an inter-society, a pledge of omerta among the brotherhood of police, and that they do close ranks, even to protect a loose cannon?
Well, there are police officers that'll do that. There are also police officers that'll step forward and tell the truth, even if it means hurting their own careers or the careers of their colleagues. It's not possible, I don't think, to paint them with a broad brush. There are those who would adhere to a quote-unquote code of silence, and there are those who will strictly adhere to the law, and whoever breaks it will pay the consequences. I've met some police officers who are incredibly vigorous in their pursuit of other officers when they think they've done wrong.
In cases where you did find brutality, were the leaders in those particular precincts or divisions or counties, were the leaders cooperative, or did you find that in most cases where you were trying to investigate valid problems, the leaders were not cooperative?
The
the chiefs, the sheriffs, etc.?
I think that was pretty mixed too. In some cases, we would, where the administrator might privately believe that the officer screwed up, we might have an easier time getting records. But there is a great reluctance. A lot of people in government think that the records they generate are the government's. And the records they generate are not the government's, they're the people's. And it's an educational, I mean, there are some records that legitimately are not public record, but the vast majority of records in the state of Texas are. And there's a general reluctance, I would say, among bureaucrats, whether they're in police departments or county governments or wherever, to cut loose with their records. And it doesn't, and sometimes they're reluctant to, even if they don't know that there's something damaging inside. They just don't want to give up the records. Yeah?
Do you get a lot of feedback from these officers that, hey, why are you trying to bust our balls? You know, I mean, we're trying to do our job.
One guy wrote back and said something to the effect of, here are the records, but y'all ought to really be investigating the criminals. If you were ever a victim of a crime, you'd be squealing like a pig stuck under a gate instead of investigating cops. There's a lot of pig analogies in this for reasons that I don't fully appreciate. But there was some of the officers were would talk to us, and some wouldn't, and some talked to us after the stories ran, and some didn't. And invariably, when they did talk to us, they gave us information that was really beneficial to their side of getting their side of the story out.
Was the majority of the ones that, the 10% or so that didn't turn over their records or still happen today, were they departments that had internal affairs units and did not have a civilian review board or anything like that, or policing their own, in a sense?
I guess I haven't analyzed that, but I can just say my gut was it went from everything from a very small, from rural towns to great big cities. I don't know whether, I don't think there was any rhyme or reason to who didn't give us the records. It was just people who didn't want to give them to us, and to get them, we would have had to have taken them. We did take 2 agencies to court, and we won in both of those cases. Got the records. Yeah.
These entities are capable of policing themselves, or are they capable of doing that at all?
I think being a police officer in that regard is like any other profession. Doctors don't like to think that other doctors are capable of malpractice. Journalists don't like to think of other journalists as being sloppy or slipshod. And the vast majority of police in the state of Texas, I believe, are honest, hardworking people, and they ascribe those same virtues to their colleagues. So I don't know how to really get at that. Yeah.
How hard was it to take 2.5 years worth of research and turn it into 7 or 8 stories instantly and run it overwhelming things right now?
It would have been had we decided to publish all of the stories at one time, where you would like run a back-to-back series starting one Sunday and then finishing up on the next Saturday. As things turned out, when the Rodney King incident happened in March in Los Angeles, we had information that showed statistically that the problem appeared to be greater in Texas than it was not only in California but any place else in the country. So we made a decision at that time to publish the stories as they were written, rather than wait and publish them all at the end of a special section or something. So that took a lot of the pressure off. But it was the hardest thing was deciding which cases were worth spending the time to. When you've got two folders and they both look pretty good, and it's going to take a week to check them both out and a lot of travel to some far-flung place, making that decision was difficult. The writing of the stories themselves were, it was no more difficult than it would be writing any other story that you worked on for a long time.
Was there ever a time when the reporters and the editors wanted to just abandon the project? And if so, how'd y'all get over the hurdle of doing that?
I don't know how we got over the hurdle, but I think at one point it was draining. It really was draining, and not just on the reporters, but on the editors and the photographer that worked with us. We just bulldogged it. We just kept right on going. I mean, at some point in time, when you've got a year and a half of your life or 2 years of your life into something, you're not going to cast it aside because you get tired or burned out. You're going to finish it and get it in the paper. And it just is determination and perseverance. Yeah.
What kind of response did you get from the community? Or did you get that?
I don't really know what sort of response we got, because I'm not sure whether the stories were widely circulated in the communities we wrote about. Morning News has a lot of circulation, but in some places it's not. There wasn't a whole lot of response. We got some letters, we got some phone calls. We get a lot of tips. We still do get a lot of tips as a result of the stories, but not anything really dramatic. Yeah. I'm not sure. The last I heard, which was a while back, was he was still looking for work. I don't know what happened to him. I probably need to follow that up.
Dan, serious, your whole project was miraculously timely, given what happened in LA. Do you know what the spark was that began all this, and when it actually happened? When did Lorraine?
I do. I believe it was in 1986, and there was a story in the Dallas Morning News about a woman named Edith Collins, if I'm remembering the name right. Anyway, a woman who was shot by police. And I'm not going to be good on the details of this, but as it turned out, the police version of the shooting didn't match the physical evidence in the case, and it was a celebrated cause in Dallas, what happened to the wrong that happened to this woman. And Lorraine just seized upon this case and kind of realized that there was a way to check out with records and evidence whether or not what officialdom was telling you was actually the truth. And she did a lot of work on some questionable shootings of citizens in Dallas by police, and one thing kind of led to another.
Did you, since you investigated cases all over the state, did you come to San Antonio at all? You should have.
Yeah, San Antonio. Yeah, I've been through the courthouses here. I mean, did we write about something in San Antonio?
I was just
Yeah.
interested in your comment.
I'm trying to remember, and I honestly cannot because there were so many records, what success we had with getting documents in Bexar County in the cities that are here. It's in the stories, but I'm swamped with information. Yeah, I mean, there was, we wrote about one story that was tried in a federal court here, a man who was beaten to death out near Dilley, Texas. It wound up in before a federal judge here. Yeah?
brought it up, and I was wondering, are there citizens review boards in Texas?
In some cities?
There are. Could you name a city?
Well, there is some sort of citizens review board in Dallas. To tell you the truth, I am not that familiar with it. I work in Fort Worth, and I don't cover Dallas. And Lorraine, if she were here, could give you the get go on that. But I'm not. Did we what? No. Did not. Yep.
Now that you've won your sir, what makes this leave you with a feeling of let down, or do you know where you want to go now, or are you back where you were 3 years ago?
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going to go. I mean, I'm not trying to get a job at the New York Times or the Washington Post or out of state.
Take on another big project, or you feel either relax now, or?
I've relaxed for 4 months. I'm ready to get after something. I don't know what yet.
You say you're not looking for a job in New York Times or Washington Post, so are you going to stay in Fort Worth and do some more reporting?
I really don't. You're asking me questions I ask myself every day. I don't know what my plans will be. I may call Mike Cochran. Yeah, get to the number 2 guy on my list. I don't know. You get into the newsrooms of the big city papers in Texas, and I don't know if it's like this. I'm sure it's not like this at some of the so-called destination papers, the Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer. But you look in the newsrooms in Texas, and there aren't many reporters who are as old and decrepit as I am. I'm 37, and most of the there's not very much gray hair in the newsrooms as far as reporters go. They either get into management or become editors, or I don't know what. Maybe space aliens kidnapped them, but there aren't many mature reporters in Texas, and I think that will change as the papers get better. I mean, the papers and the pay scale in Texas now is a whole lot better than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and there are a lot of people at the Dallas Morning News, for example, who are in their mid to late 30s, and maybe in 10 years they'll be in their mid 40s, I don't know, and still be reporters. I'd like to think that it's not just a young person's profession.
The hours are such that it almost has to be a young person's profession. The demand on your time, the demand on time takes away from family, and those kinds of things.
I think there are a lot of people who are willing to put in whatever time it takes to. I mean, certainly, yeah. At some point in time, people will just say, "Let's go do something where I can make more money. Let's go do something where there's less stress." Probably stress is more of a factor than the financial end of it these days. But I think there's a generation of journalists that in Texas that are kind of on that cusp and may move over and stay. I don't know. I don't think it has to be a young person's profession.
Drop in the amount of cases reported police brutality since the rest came out, because officers are more cautious about the way they
I don't know a way to measure that statistically. For example, the records that we had access to from the Justice Department now believes that those records should not be released. You couldn't get the same data for 87 and 88. We couldn't get that data today or data for 89 or 90 or 91. And there's not any sort of central, somebody complains about a police officer, they can complain to the city council, to the police chief, to the internal affairs, to their state rep, to the Justice Department, to the FBI. There's not any sort of central log of complaints. So that's difficult. That's really difficult to measure. I know there are a lot of police officers who are outraged about what happened in California. And you've seen a lot of them on television speaking out about it. They're as shocked as we are. I was in New Orleans. I was on vacation, and I guess my first reaction was I felt a little guilty about being on vacation when I could have been in the newsroom and maybe contributing to some of the coverage. But beyond that, I was both both a little, you know, you just really didn't, after it had been shown on television so often and everybody saw it and had in their mind an idea about what happened, I don't know that many people even contemplated that the officers would be acquitted. I didn't give that a lot of thought, and so I was a little bit shocked in that regard. But I also know of enough other cases in Texas that we had looked at where the local authorities had the opportunity to do something and didn't. And so in that regard, I wasn't that shocked. It was kind of a mixed bag of reaction there.